Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. We're looking at a concept today that honestly is a total game changer for how you handle those incredibly stressful, unresolved situations in your life and work. We live in a world that constantly demands immediate solutions, right? But what if the most powerful, effective thing you can do in a crisis is absolutely nothing? Today, we're unpacking the source material behind this incredible idea known as the power of wise restraint. You know that modern trap we all fall into? The one where we constantly confuse mere movement with actual progress? Just because you're doing something doesn't mean you're getting anywhere. When we face something uncomfortable or unresolved, our immediate knee-jerk reflex is to intervene. We want to move. We want to fix it right this second. But movement is not always the solution to our problems. So here's the thing. When things feel uncertain, our instinct is to immediately jump in. But a lot of the time, the system just needs a minute to settle. And our action is the actual disturbance. We think we're helping, like firing off a reactionary email to clarify some minor miscommunication, but we're actually just stirring up a situation that desperately needs stillness to naturally resolve itself. All right, section 1, the fixing instinct. Let's look at exactly why we feel the overwhelming urge to act when we really shouldn't. I think we really need to validate this first. Your desire to jump in and fix things, it almost always comes from a genuinely great place. We're talking deep care, a strong sense of responsibility, or just that very human discomfort with the unknown. We fear loss, and we desperately crave control. It's entirely natural to want to fix things for the people we care about.
But, and this is where the paradigm shifts, acting purely out of that anxious discomfort can actually cause significant harm. The action itself isn't the bad guy here. The problem is when that action becomes compulsive. When we act just to soothe our own internal panic rather than to genuinely solve the problem, we cross a really dangerous line.
Think about the fallout when we do this. We rush in to relieve our own pressure, and in doing so, we interrupt natural processes. We end up over-explaining and creating unnecessary confusion, or we overcorrect tiny issues until they blow up into major ones. We force people to move before they're truly ready, and ultimately, we make decisions driven entirely by anxiety instead of clarity.
It really boils down to this. Action grounded in wisdom genuinely helps, but action driven by anxiety damages. If you're doing something just to make yourself feel less anxious in the heat of the moment, you're probably doing damage to the situation. True helpfulness requires the emotional maturity to know the difference between the two.
Moving on to our next section, redefining doing nothing, because it is definitely not what you think it is. First off, let's shatter some deeply ingrained myths. Choosing restraint absolutely does not mean you're throwing your hands up and giving up. It doesn't mean you're lazy, it's not avoiding your responsibilities, and it definitely doesn't mean you're just resigning yourself to being passive forever. Society paints doing nothing as a weakness, but in this context, that is a total misunderstanding. Actually, doing nothing is an incredibly active, highly disciplined process. It's about quietly observing, allowing time to pass so those hot emotions can cool down. Sometimes it's about letting natural consequences do the teaching, waiting for better info, and, crucially, refusing to make things worse. Sometimes restraint is literally the most powerful action you can take. Now, I know this is incredibly hard to actually do. Our minds absolutely scream for relief. They hit us with all this pressure. I have to say something. I must fix this right now. I cannot tolerate this uncertainty for another second. You basically have to fight your own brain just to sit still. But letting the dust settle before touching anything is so crucial, especially when the stakes are high. Think about a tense argument with a partner where you desperately want to send that third follow-up text, or navigating messy workplace politics. Jumping the gun usually backfires. A lot of situations don't need immediate repair. What they really need is patience, time, and silence. Which brings us to the next part, the guiding question. How exactly do we check our internal compass before we act and make a total mess of things? Okay, you need to sear this question right into your brain to separate true wisdom from a frantic, anxious impulse. Before you speak, before you hit send, ask yourself, am I doing this because it is absolutely necessary, or am I just doing this because I am uncomfortable doing nothing? The process for this is actually pretty straightforward. Step 1, acknowledge and really feel that burning urge to fix things. Step 2, hit pause and ask yourself that guiding question. And step 3, make a conscious choice. If the action is truly needed, you act.
If it's just your anxiety talking, you deliberately pause.
Because here's the deeper principle at play. Not every problem demands an immediate intervention. Some things literally only resolve when we give them the space to do so. A wound heals because we stop reopening it, right? A conflict settles because we stop feeding it with more words. And a decision becomes so much clearer when we stop forcing it before it's ready. The source material puts this perfectly, noting that sometimes the most useful thing we can do is nothing. Not because we don't care, but because we care enough not to interfere unnecessarily. The constant urge to fix things can literally become the force that keeps breaking them. Just let that sink in for a second. And that leads us into our final section, the art of wise restraint and why it's truly an invisible strength. There's this massive contrast between the outside view and the inside reality here. On the outside, wise restraint just looks like you're doing absolutely nothing. People might even wonder why you're just standing there. But on the inside, it requires immense patience, ironclad self-control, deep trust, humility, and serious emotional maturity. That is exactly why it's the hardest thing to do. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Peace begins when we stop disturbing what is trying to heal. In a world obsessed with constant action and immediate fixes, are you brave enough to step back? Think about that the very next time you feel the desperate urge to intervene. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this helps you find some strength in stillness.